the passive. And to make passive structures, you need be verbs. So here are the be verbs in the present simple, the past simple, the past participle, and the continuous or progressive form. Let's look at an active sentence. Here is an active one. Sarah ate the apple. So it's not passive. How do we know it's active? We look for the main verb. We look to the left. And if that's the doer or the agent of the verb, we know it's active. So did Sarah do the eating? And she did. So we know it's active. Let's look at the passive. Here we find the main verb, eaten. We look to the left. Did the apple do the eating? No, it didn't. So this must be passive. What's happened grammatically or structurally is that the object has become the subject and the agent or the doer has become attached to the end of the sentence with by. You could also omit that and just have the apple was eaten, and that would still be correct. Now let's look at what happens to this part. So we have included a be verb. If this was past simple, which it is, then we get a past simple be verb added in. So we're always adding in our own be verb in passive. What happens to the main verb? Well, whatever the main verb was is irrelevant or not important here, because the main verb always becomes the past participle. So just to repeat that, the main verb, the form of the main verb, which is past simple here, gets transferred to the be verb, and then the main verb itself always becomes past participle. So it's fairly easy to do. Let's just try a few other forms so that you can get an idea of how it all works. So let's try, to start with, let's change that tense to this one. So it's present simple. So Sarah eats the apple. We need to add our be verb. Now, if that's present simple, then we need to choose one of these present simple be verbs. The correct one here is, and because it's the main verb, it always transfers down here into the past participle. So it's eaten. We end up with the apple is eaten by Sarah. Let's look at a continuous form. So we've got is eating. So Sarah is eating the apple. We look at the be verb. They've included a be verb, so we have to put their be verb in exactly as it is. Now we want to include our own be verb, and our be verb has to take the form that's here. So this is ing, so being. Because we only have one continuous form that we can use, so being. And then that's the main verb, so that becomes past participle. Okay, so the apple is being eaten by Sarah. Let's look at another tense, perhaps slightly harder, but not really. It's the perfect tense. So has eaten. Let's see what we can do. Now we have an auxiliary verb, and that will just come down without change. And then we have to add our be verb. So we look at what form that is. It's past participle, so we need a past participle be verb, which is been. And then the main verb is always past participle, regardless of what it is above. So we'll have eaten again. So the apple has been eaten by Sarah. That's the perfect form. Let's look at a future form. So will for the future. After a modal, we always have an infinitive, so will be eaten. Sorry, my mistake there. So we're actually going to go for will eat. When we turn that into passive, the modal stays as it is without change, and the be verb, we must add in a be verb, will take the infinitive form, because after modals we always have infinitive, so that's infinitive again here, and there's be. And then main verb always takes past participle form, so it's eaten, and we get the apple will be eaten by Sarah. Let's look at a modal, another modal, so must. After modals we always have the infinitive, so eat. So Sarah must eat the apple. Modals don't change, so we get must. After, we need to add our be verb, so we need to add in be because we need an infinitive after a modal, so must be. And the main verb always past participle, so it must be eaten. So the apple must be eaten by Sarah. You might also be wondering, is there any tense that won't take the passive? And there's two that seem to be uncomfortable in passive. And the first one that we'll look at is future continuous. So future, will. And then after a modal, you always have be. And then the main verb will be ing because we want the continuous. So we'll be eating. Sarah will be eating the apple. How will that transfer into passive? Well, modals don't change, so it's going to be will. And if you already have a be verb, you have to keep it exactly as it is, so it's be. Then you need your own be verb, and we need to take the ing form, so being. And then we need the past participle of the main verb, so eaten. When we read it, it sounds like this: the apple will be being eaten by Sarah, which sounds pretty awkward, so we want to avoid that. Technically it's not wrong, but it's something we should avoid, so don't do that one. Let's look at another one that you should not do, and that's when you have the present perfect continuous. So let's make the present perfect has, and then been, has been, and the ing, so it has been eating. What happens? Well, we have an auxiliary, so we get has. We already have a be verb, so we have to keep it, been. Then our be verb that we have to add in must take ing, being. And then that must always take the past participle form, which is eaten. We end up with the apple has been being eaten by Sarah, which doesn't really make much sense at all. It's very hard to understand. So that would be avoided. So they're the two that you don't use. That is the future continuous and the present perfect continuous don't go into passive very comfortably. Let's look at a couple of other issues that come up with the passive, and one of them is that we can't ever use intransitive verbs or complement verbs. You may wonder what they are, so let's have a look. This one is an intransitive verb, or a no object verb, because you can not put an object after it. You would never say Sarah sleeps herself or Sarah sleeps the baby, so no object after this verb. What happens if we make it passive? Well, if it's in the present simple form, we need a present simple be verb, and then that's past participle, which is slept. We end up with is slept Sarah, which is clearly wrong. That's why it's in red. Let's look at a complement verb. You know this is a complement because these two things, this is not the object because these two things are not different. So Sarah is the director, so actually they're the same thing, and they've been, joined, I guess you could say, structurally with the verb became. So this is a complement verb because it uses the complement, not an object. What happens here is you look at this form and it's past simple, so we put the past simple here. Then you need that in the past participle form, which is actually become, and you end up with the director was become Sarah, which again, it's absurd, so that's not possible. Let's look at just another couple of small details, and we have noun clauses. So whenever you want to turn a noun clause, which is when you get that followed by subject and verb, let's read this first. Scientists believe that the climate is changing. Let's see what happens when it becomes passive. That essentially becomes 2 plus be. So the climate is believed to be changing. So believe does the normal change. We get the be verb in the present simple and then the past participle of that. So is believed. But that just becomes to be, and then you get your changing. We have omitted scientists here. You could put by scientists if you wanted, but you don't really need to. Let's look at another small detail, and impersonal report structures. Here there's not much to think about. It's just simply a structure that begins with it, and they're really good for reports or formal writing. So it is believed that, and then you put your noun clause here, subject verb. So really what we're just showing you is you start with it, you use a passive structure here, and then a noun clause afterwards. So that's the type of structure that you can use for formal writing. And there's just another slight variation. Same thing. It is widely accepted that subject, verb, or noun clause. Okay, and that's all you need to know for passive.